three-time Olympian, four-time World Cup champion. He's designed over 20 parks here in North America. So Scott is pretty much one of the premier whitewater park designers in the world today, and we're very fortunate to have him here.
Just to give you and put a face to a name on what a whitewater park is, this is a project I worked on in Reno, Nevada, and it's kind of an interesting thing about how whitewater parks work and how they can really transform what's in the river. Reno, for obvious reasons, kind of turned its back to its river for a number of years. Going to Reno was all about gambling and other things, and so, but gambling now in America you can do anywhere, so Reno's really trying to rebrand itself as a destination for a lot of reasons. When we came in to start the project, there was a dam in this section of the river. This is an island. There was a lot of crime on that island. The river was very channelized. You can see the concrete banks on the left. And so the objective was, how do we recreate a natural river in that channel? We brought in a lot of natural rock, built bridges to the island. There's an amphitheater on the island. There's actually 2 channels of whitewater that are there. And it transformed that neighborhood. I mean, the land values you can measure, they've gone up. People come there for festivals now. When you went to Reno before, you wouldn't have gone to this part of the island. And I think the most telling thing is there's a chapel on the side of the river there, and it's a place in Reno where you can get married, get a divorce, and rent a raft. So the big driver on these things is the people who come to walk along its banks. And so we've hired a landscape architect at S2O, and a big part of our design process is, how do we create a park that's good for everybody, not just the kayakers that are in the river. Coming in, and when we review the sites that are here, looking at where there's existing parking, looking at where there's existing restrooms, fitting it into your trail system, fitting it into your recreational master plan is a big part of the project as well. So really, the project is about creating fun on a river. This is a park in Pueblo, Colorado that I worked on. It's about creating a wave you can play on. It's about creating freestyle events and bringing people to your town. The draw is creating that economic impact in your community. This is a park we did in Charlotte, North Carolina. It has about 1 million visitors a year. For every person that comes to visit, they spend about $120 to $140 a day. And they spend it on hotel rooms, they spend it on restaurants, they shop in your shops, they drink in your coffee shops. In Charlotte, with the tremendous amount of visitors, that's about $37 million a year. And about $7 million is internal to that whitewater park. Talk a lot about how these parks are built. You know, the first impression for people who haven't been one before is, oh my God, they're going to build a skateboard park in my river. You know, it's going to be all concrete, and somebody's going to graffiti it up, and I don't want that in my river. It's very much not that. It's about bringing in natural rock. You know, the big thing, and I'll show some more pictures of finished parks later, but the big thing we hear the most is, I didn't realize that was man-made. In terms of short-term impacts, we dry out the river when we work, so we'll literally divert the water to one side of the river. We'll work on the other side, and then once we get that side built, we'll swap it over and finish the park. We go in, we work with the flood model, we design it in a way that has no negative impact to your 100-year flood. And so what that means is, if it's inside the dikes, it's going to stay inside the dikes, and we're not going to have that negative impact of you. The design process also involves working with fish biologists to enhance the habitat that's out there. In this case, we're able to create deep overwinter habitat. We're also able to create a lot of velocity barriers or boulder clusters. And typically some of that's dictated. A lot of times the project gets expanded so that it's not only a whitewater park project, but you're also creating fish habitat upstream and downstream. This is an extended reach in Steamboat Springs. That was a project that a company I used to work for did. So you're creating places where there's recreation. You're also creating places where you improve the fish habitat that's out there and the fishing experience that's out there for fishing. And what we found is 2 or 3 sites that have a tremendous amount of potential in terms of being cost efficient to build, and also having the energy you need to create a surf wave and to create some of these features that would be a part of the whitewater park. So in general, very excited about what's going on, and we're going to go home and do some math and some analysis, and I think one of those sites is going to sort of stick out as being the superior site at that point. So you're creating a chute where drop that's spread over some distance is concentrated into one spot. So that's what creates your wave. You know, at low water, those waves are less powerful than at high water. At higher water, they get bigger up to a point, and then they become inundated. And so typically a part of a design like this, especially in a high traffic area, would be to sort of divide that current up so that you're creating one chute that's predominantly a play chute, and then a lower slope chute that's a bypass to that play feature. In some cases, depending on what we find out about the geotechnical aspects of it, you can just leave one part of the river alone and create your wave on the other side. Your peak average flows is where you tune it around. What we're really limited by is that flood model. And so at the very high end, we can't affect this 1 in 100-year flood. And so that drives how much we can constrict and how much drop we can make. And so we're targeting that, hey, this is the flow that you want it to be ideal for. And usually it's a month to 6 weeks in the start of the summer. And then as it gets lower, you get a different experience, but your peak experience is that. Typically higher than that, it starts to green out and disappear with that sediment load. But what's good about the parts that we're looking at is the river is quite confined. It's not going to wander off into somebody's neighborhood. You know, the dikes keep it where it is. And so that's how we deal with it. We find a stable place typically, and then design for that sediment load. So. And we create our drop structure is essentially what we call a control structure. And so we prevent the river from moving back and forth at that drop. It will go through our drop shape, or the mouth of our drop, and that will define where the center flow is based on that. And then it creates its own self-scouring pool. You measure a tremendous number of fish in the pools where these drops are created. It's basically run riffle pool. I mean, we all learn to surf on a natural river, and we're creating a wave that's essentially created the same way. And so it can be a real benefit. Also, when you start to add some of the character things above and beyond that wave, when you talk about the beginner course, you are creating those velocity barriers and essentially ideal habitat in that sense. With regard to attaining permits, it's something that is permittable. We've done this in rivers around the world. It's a process, and we're going to go through that. Is it going to be a 2-week process? No, it's going to be a very long process in terms of making sure that we get our studies done in advance, getting our design that functions well within the character and morphology of this river. It's also going to be a process of working with those agencies to make sure we meet their criteria and priorities. And then in terms of location, really one of the big drivers for these whitewater parks is to be close to an urban center so you have that economic impact. So people come to your town to go kayaking, and then they go to your restaurants and your shops, and that's the priority, because we could all drive 6 hours to ideal whitewater, but the trick is, how do you create that synergy in town? How do you create that event in town? And so that's the reason why we chose the locations that we're looking
my experiences with this river, my own, is remember the flood of 1995? And we just had trees and debris and stumps, and it washed out half the dike in different locations. So now if we put an obstruction in the river, we're really going to create a erosion problem, aren't we?
So the concern is that in major 100-year flood events, that this will negatively impact that. And we actually met with the dike engineers today and walked through their design. It's something that they're confident and we're confident we can design to not have a negative impact on that flood.
In the spring, you know, like all the paddlers here have paddled, and you know, we've been sitting on waves watching pretty big logs rolling down the river. How would that impact the design, or how, you know, would the design work with that, like so that they would just continue on their merry way? Or
exactly. So there's two concerns with the logs, and the first is a short-term concern. You're on the way when a log comes down, and I can't help you there.
No.
You just gotta keep your eyes open.
What happens if you get a log jam?
The second concern is a log jam, and we design them in a way where as the water gets higher, they don't stick to it. So it's got and that's a part of the modeling process. Ice is a similar concern in terms of shape and angles. We'll proceed with design now. We'll come up with a concept design. We'll then share that with the agency, share that with the funding body, say this is what the project does, here's how it functions, here's the site where we want it to be. We'll be pursuing funding and permits in parallel. That process varies in time. Funding is usually the longer of the two, but you're looking at, once you complete those two processes, you know, essentially another 6 to 8 months to complete design, and then construction. Usually you're limited on your construction window based on what's going on in the river, spawning fish, things like that. And usually either you build it in 2 years, so do some amount of the park in the first year, some amount in the second. But your window for construction in each of those is roughly 6 to 8 weeks. In this case, in August, maybe a little bit before August and a little bit after August in terms of the total window. So that's roughly the schedule.
Safety is safety. I don't expect anyone with any backcountry experience to go ski touring. I don't expect anyone who has any whitewater awareness to go jumping in the river like so many people do in the summer too big.
So how do you stop that?
You can't. Can you stop anyone from going to snowmobile in the backcountry when we have a high avalanche hazard? You can't. It's individual responsibility, but as Dan said, it will come with education.
Again, it's education. The courses will be available. There'll be pool sessions in the winter. You know, in the spring we'll move out. There will be signage as well. But we're not going to create any hazards in the river. There will be no holes that people fall into and can't get out. So there are hazards in the river. Right now at the North Fernie Bridge, there is a horrendous log sieve covering the river left channel. And that is a hazard that is real. And if swimmers could die there, it's a real issue. With an active whitewater society, we'll maintain the river and help eliminate the obstacles. Most of the issues with river safety in this valley are entrapments and log jams. And as Roxanne said, never go near a log jam. If you see a log jam in the river in front of you, do everything you can to avoid it. Do not try and crawl up onto a log. The entrapments involve people getting sucked under the log and getting entangled in the log jam underwater, unable to escape. The search and rescue, Fernie Search and Rescue, support the concept of more education and river knowledge in the community. I believe it's a good project. So again, thank you everybody for coming out. If this is indicative of the community as a whole, we're gonna have a whitewater park here.